Hi, everybody. I'm Esther, and this is my podcast, My Trans Dad. All right, I'm back. Here we go. Let's see. Looking at my notes here. I wanted to touch on something that I mentioned in episode 1. I mentioned that I had been prescribed medication for my anxiety, but my journey to get there, to end up being comfortable taking medication every day for my anxiety, took way longer than maybe I made it seem. And the bulk of that experience has to do with my relationship with therapy and therapists. So let's talk therapy. I am actually really curious about all of your guys' experience with different therapists and different methods of therapy and what you found has worked for you, because I have definitely had really good therapists and not so good therapists, which will be fun to hear about, I hope. Well, maybe not fun, maybe interesting and connective, and maybe you see a bit of yourself in these situations that I'll describe. So here we go. My first therapist that I went to was only like a month after I found out about my dad being transgender, and this would have been in the year 2015, probably October-ish. And this therapist, she was through my church, and it was clear that she had never had anybody sit in her chair that was quite like me, that had the same issues in their life. I'm sure she'd seen some people with really, really terrible things that had happened to them, but this was so specific and unique and just so difficult that she really didn't know what to do. I was way above her pay grade. She tried. She said some nice things, but like looking back, I can tell that she thought they were nice things, but honestly, they just made me feel worse than I already did. Because I think that mixing the religion, the Christianity, into this issue, just I think that there's a way to do that, but she didn't know how. She was definitely caught off guard. But anyway, it kind of put a sour taste in my mouth for therapists. And after seeing her, I was in a deep, deep depression throughout my senior year of high school. Because remember, I don't think I ever mentioned this. My dad came out as transgender when I was 17 years old. And this was the summer before my senior year of high school. So all through my senior year, I was depressed. I had this boyfriend that I really liked. And actually in the conversation where my mom told me about my dad coming out, I thought that she was going to tell me to break up with my boyfriend. And so I was on my guard. And I was like, Mom, you can't tell me to break up with him. But she's like, I'm not talking about that. And if only she had been talking about that. Am I right? Anyway, senior year of high school, I had seen the therapist just one time. And then I didn't see another therapist for 2 or 3 years. I had moved away from home and was living in a big city with some friends, and over some time, I noticed that my communication with them was worse and worse and worse. It just was terrible. I was not a good friend to them. I let them down in a lot of ways. I was dealing with some stuff, guys, and my friends at the time definitely took the brunt of that. I was lashing out and hurt them, not physically, but I was not a good friend to them. And I've really tried to make amends. And I think that, I don't know, people move on, but this is such a core part of who I am, that this experience that I'm about to tell you, this was such a turning point in my life that I think it lives bigger in my head than it lives in their heads. And that's okay. That's honestly the way it ought to be. Otherwise, what does that say about my impact? Apparently what I'm trying to say is, if they are still struggling with the way I treated them all these years later, then I was a real piece of work. But I think that from some conversations, they've forgiven me, and I appreciate that. I need that from them. And they've moved on. They're doing great things. They're honestly really amazing people. Anyway, in this big city with these friends, I was struggling, like I've said, and I needed to get in touch with another therapist. I was like, enough is enough. I am in this too deep. This is bigger than me. And this therapist also happened to be through my church. And this time she was exactly what I needed. She was motherly, kind of like an aunt that you just feel so close with. She was kind. She listened without judgment. I could tell she really just wanted to see me get better, see me be able to function. And her care, her honestly, like, tenderness towards me lives in my heart to this day, and I think it will live in my heart forever. Oh gosh, even thinking about her, I'm kind of choking up a little bit. She just means so much to me. And she's changed my life. And I wish I could convey my appreciation. But I think that the reason why she was so good is that she was in this big city. She was working with people from a lot more backgrounds than my first therapist. And she just had a better read on who I was and what I needed. And I think back to my first session with her. I don't think she said 10 words the entire time. She sat very patiently in her chair across from me and let me yell and let me cry and let me ramble, and I would get quiet as a mouse. I would whisper my feelings. I would talk about the most difficult thing I've ever been through. And she just would sit there. She sat there and looked at me with such love in her eyes. Oh. And she could tell that I was deeply hurting. And she knew that. And I mean, I didn't know at the time. I was really skeptical about seeing a therapist, hence why I didn't see one for 2 or 3 years. But I think that she knew that she could help me, and she did. I just love her. And after that session with her, I walked out of the room, and I hadn't felt that light in so long. I just felt this weight lifted off my shoulders. And my friend had come with me, such a good friend, and she looked at me and she was really worried. I was like, what's going on? She's like, are you okay? I'm like, yeah, I feel really great. But she was kind of worried because I had been in the office with the therapist for like 2.5 hours. And usually an intake session is like an hour or even like 53 minutes if you're really, really time sensitive. So, and I didn't even notice that much time had passed. But that therapist, she had cleared her schedule for me. She had, I don't know if she had to cancel appointments. I don't know, but knowing how good she is now, I'm certain that she had to. She probably knew what she was going to deal with when I called in to make the appointment, and then I walked in her door, and she knew to clear the afternoon to let me have the space to grieve and process some things and share some things that I had been holding in for so long. And I'll be forever grateful to her. Just I can't even say. And anyway, the rest of the day went by, and that night I was home with my friends, my roommates, and I realized that for the first time in months, I was able to laugh and joke with them. And when I had this realization that I was laughing, I started crying, and like tears of longing and sadness and tears of healing, because I realized that I felt like myself again for the first time in months. And that feeling, I'm choking up again. That was such an important day in my life. To start processing in a healthy way what had happened. I was not coping. I was not doing well. And then that feeling of feeling like myself, just feeling my actual personality rise to the surface and kind of shine through a bit. It was amazing. But that feeling only lasted a few minutes. Because there was just so much darkness that was festering in my soul. That it really took a while for me to feel that way again. But I savored it, and I knew that I was doing things right when I was on that track, when I was feeling like myself. I knew that I was doing the right things, and that was so satisfying. Through this whole process, through seeing my many more therapists that I'll talk about, feeling like myself again was kind of, in hindsight, that's the gauge I kind of could use to see if I was on the right track, if I was healing, if I was doing the right things. It's just, it was, do I feel like myself? Do I feel less dissonance in my brain? Am I able to handle things better? And that's kind of what I looked for. So I saw that therapist in the big city for a little over a year, probably about 15 months. Pretty regularly, I would go see her every week or every other week, and then eventually kind of once a month for about a year, a little longer. And then it was time for me to move home. I moved back home. I went to my university town, and I realized that I needed to see a therapist again. I was struggling a bit, and so I called the university services, and I saw a student therapist, like a student studying therapy and studying counseling. And honestly, I should have known better than to go to a student, to go to someone with zero experience, because I did not get what I needed. That is an understatement, but when I was signing up for it, I kind of felt like I was doing the student a favor. Like, hey, this is something you will see throughout your life, through your practice. So let's see how you handle this. I kind of felt like I was preparing them, but honestly, it was not what was right for me. I thought I was in a better place than I was, but I struggled. And I kind of knew that they were going to make mistakes in how they treated me, for lack of a better word, like a doctor treating his patient, right? And I kind of just thought, oh, I'll deal with the mistakes, I'll put up with it. But like, they're learning, whatever, they're gonna be fine, it's gonna be fine, you got this. I'm talking to myself. And I knew that they were trying, like sincerely trying to help me, but I stopped seeing that therapist at the university after a few months because it wasn't right for me. But he's a great person. I hope, and I think that he probably is doing really well because he was such a good person. But yes, this was a male therapist. That's actually really an important factor, I think, in my therapy with him not being very effective, because not only was I talking about my trans dad and all those feelings associated with gender and essentially like parts of your body that you don't talk with strangers about. I also was working through some sexual assault trauma that had happened to me during my freshman year of college, about 2 years prior to seeing this therapist. And that was the first time I had worked through that. I didn't talk about it with the therapist in the big city because I kind of had bigger fish to fry with all this stuff about my dad. And so that healing took a backseat for a while. But I struggled to connect with this therapist at the university because being a man, being a student, he didn't really know how to help me, even though he tried. He was really, really such a good person. But yeah, I realized that I needed to be with a therapist that I felt like I could be entirely honest with. And eventually I've found one or two like that. But anyway, after seeing that therapist at the university, I didn't see a therapist for a little while, which means my mental health took a decline, which means I fell back into some ways of thinking and some ways of doing things that ultimately didn't serve me, were not in my best interest. So the next therapist I saw was probably about a year and a half later, in 2020 by this point. I remember talking about the pandemic in my therapy with this next therapist. I had moved home again during the pandemic. I had graduated from college, and I was still a wreck. I was just a mess. I was on the struggle bus, guys. This was not easy. This was not easy at all. But around this time, after seeing a few therapists, I was able to notice, kind of pinpoint, and be able to name my symptoms, namely anxiety, distrust of the world, distrust of my boyfriend James, who I was dating, depression, for sure, like difficulty functioning sometimes, difficulty getting out of bed, it was hard, and fear. Fear was a big one. Fear is an interesting concept. I talked about this in episode 1, where fear is what's held me back from starting. Oh, sorry if you can hear my dog barking. But fear is what held me back from starting this podcast for a long, long time. Because for the reasons, please see episode 1. But fear is kind of how I realized I interact with the world. I make fear-based decisions more often than on the basis of anything else. I've been dealing with a lot of fear for a long time, and I'm kind of done. That's going to be a big step for me when I can say that I no longer make decisions based on fear. And I hope that day comes sooner rather than later, because think of all the things I could do, or anybody could do, if we just weren't afraid. Let's just not be afraid, okay? You and me, right here. We're not going to be afraid anymore. Okay. Anyway, so I felt fear. And then I generally just didn't really know what to do with my life and how to navigate my reality. Because being a recent graduate in the pandemic, I just was kind of treading water, I didn't have any experience, so I couldn't get a really good job where I could work from home or whatever. I didn't even know what I was qualified for, and honestly wasn't qualified for much. So I was living at home. I was dating James, and spoiler alert, James is my husband now. So that worked out. That was really nice. James is such a shining star in my life. But during the pandemic, I sought out another therapist, and apparently I didn't learn my lesson the first time, because I saw a male therapist again. And I think that I saw him because I was kind of assigned to him. But he had a gender neutral name, so I was like, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, and I just kind of went with it. And I should have, after our first session, I should have known better. Honestly, I should have just said, hey, I really need to talk to a woman about these things, and that would have been just fine. But I ended up seeing this guy for about 6 months, and he was just not, honestly, it felt like he didn't really care about me. It felt like he didn't really care about my problems. Like, he wasn't as good as the student therapist. He at least cared. He at least, I felt like, was really trying to help me. But this guy in the pandemic, he was just more interested in using me as a guinea pig to test out the curriculum that he was building, because he was trying to start his own practice and get away from this practice he was in. Nothing wrong with the practice he was in. He was just on to bigger and better things, and I was just kind of a guinea pig for him, so I wasn't really getting the help I needed. The other weird thing is that he tended to talk about sex a lot, and I never brought it up once. I don't even think I talked to him about the sexual assault that I experienced, but he was I don't know, he just kept bringing it up, and I was like, I'm not here to talk about that, dude. You should talk about the things that I bring up. What's going on? And I didn't really know how to advocate for myself and say, hey, let me drive the discussion here, because when we talk about this, it makes me feel like I can't discuss things that I actually need to work through, and I don't really trust that you care about what I'm gonna say. And I couldn't. I had no concept that I could even say something like that. I was too scared, right? I didn't want to hurt his feelings, and so I just kind of kept going to therapy with him for about 6 months, and I didn't really get anything out of it. But eventually, I had that conversation where you kind of break up with your therapist, and it was, honestly though, it was not as awkward as I thought it was going to be, because I've had my fair share of breakups, and being the breaker upper and being the breakup being broken up with, that, I don't know, I kind of was able to navigate that conversation with more grace than I gave myself credit for at the time. But I did a pretty good job in that conversation, and went it on like pretty good terms, and I was just proud of myself for having done it. Even if the conversation had gone terribly, I would still be as proud of myself for saying, hey, I'm done. So anyway, I honestly felt better getting out of that therapy than I was while I was in that therapy. So sometimes it just doesn't fit, and you need to find a person that will fit for your personality and your needs. And around this same time, James was seeing a therapist as well, a different therapist, and because he was dealing, and currently, you never really stop dealing with this stuff. He has his own childhood trauma, and his therapist was like stellar, like 10 out of 10. We love this therapist. He was just so easy to talk to. He never brought up sex. And he honestly compares to the lady that I saw in the big city. He is just so understanding. He's kind of a no-nonsense type of guy. And honestly, this therapist that James was seeing was exactly what he needed. He kind of he needed someone to say, hey, cut the crap, get your act together, make some boundaries, and you're gonna be all right. And you're a good person. And he did it. He could say those things to James and say them with such tact and such love and such authority and but also kindness, that it had such a good effect on James, and that was really helpful. And on the few times that I went to a few sessions with James and this guy, this was actually like the one male therapist that I would say I felt absolutely fine going to talk to, and it probably was because I had James with me. James knew the whole story, and I was able to kind of have him be a security blanket, for lack of a better word, because it's like, hey, there's someone here that I trust. There's someone here that knows the ins and outs of this situation. And I know that this guy is also trusted. This therapist is also trusted. So I was able to kind of make the most of that, and had a really good experience talking to James's therapist. We had a couple of couples counseling sessions with him, because we kind of knew that we wanted to get married, and we kind of knew that we both came from families that had some issues. And so we're like, hey, mister, how are we gonna do here? Do we have any hope? Should we, what do we need to be on the lookout for? And he helped us kind of see, hey, you're gonna have problems, straight up. You're gonna have problems, but you guys are doing the right things, so keep doing the right things and you'll be fine. And we're like, whew, okay. So anyway, one of the biggest things that therapist helped me see in terms of my relationships with my trans dad is, he said, hey, there's no rule in the universe that says you're obligated to have anything to do with this person. Even if that person is still in your life 100% as your father, even if they're the best father in the world, you don't have to have a relationship with them that doesn't serve you. And it was very clear at that time that my relationship with my trans dad did not serve me. I think I mentioned this in episode 1, but my mental health would just take a nosedive every time I had an event or a lunch or even a message conversation with my trans dad, because it was too much. I was trying so hard to be something that wasn't working. I was trying so hard to be someone that my brain was saying, hey, danger, danger, this is not serving you, this is wrecking you, this is hurting you. And I would push against that feeling and say, no, 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 I need to have this relationship because then I'm a good person. Then I didn't abandon my trans dad when everyone else in his family did. And it became too much. There was a lot of pressure I put on myself to be perfect for my dad, for this trans person that was used to be my dad. And so anyway, by seeing James's therapist with him, I had to do what was best for me, and I learned how to do that, and ultimately that meant very, very limited contact on my terms only. Even if I got a call, I wouldn't answer the phone. Even if I got a message, I wouldn't even read it sometimes. But, it wasn't just cold turkey. I sent a message to my trans dad and said, hey, here's the sitch. My terms only. And I'll talk more about that later when I talk about boundaries, but there you go. Sneak peek into boundaries being crossed. Anyway, back to therapy. We kept seeing James's therapist, either just James or both of us, pretty regularly until James and I got married. And it was a beautiful, lovely wedding. And that's another episode for sure, because that was as beautiful as it was. It was also very painful. And this is so funny to have this dichotomy of the happiest day of my life was also filled with such sadness. Such an elephant in the room. When my extended family was there, they're like, there's clearly someone's missing here. And that person was my dad. And it was very hard. But it was also a really, really wonderful, fun, beautiful wedding with all my favorite people. And it was great. Anyway, we got married and we moved out of town, and we had to stop seeing James's therapist because we moved out of town. And I knew that at that point that I wanted a therapist of my own, so I found one that was close to our new home. And this would have been 2022 by this point. And my new therapist was awesome. She was so cool. She was also a student. See, I keep making the same mistakes, right? But she was further along in her education. She was a grad student instead of an undergrad. And she was much more fitting for my personality and where I was mentally at the time. And she was a young woman. She was not much older than me. So she kind of had this big sister vibe that really worked for me. I just needed I needed to feel like someone was looking out for me, and that big sister vibe was it. So I saw her for several months, probably, I don't know, 6 months or so, maybe 7 or 8 months. And because I had healed a little by this point, I wasn't completely reeling and suffering every day. And so she kind of helped me tap into what I wanted my life to look like and not just the healing process. And that was big for me. I felt like that was helping me take control of what I wanted, and it was okay to want things again. It was okay to set goals and accomplish them, even if it was just for myself. I didn't have to always be serving people or being this, quote, good person if it wasn't what was right for me. And being selfish isn't always just being selfish. Being selfish helps you put yourself in a place where you can serve others more effectively. And I learned that with this therapist. And it was wonderful. She was really nice, really cool. And on the last day of therapy with her, This was actually really wonderful. We did a little craft project where we went through magazines looking for words to sort of make a collage. And the idea is that these words would create a sentence that was kind of unique and special to me, sort of like a mantra. And I went in kind of with an idea of what I wanted my sentence to say, but I wasn't finding the right words. And my sentence, therefore, had to evolve. And I love what my sentence says even more than I would have loved the other one. And in the magazines, I found words like competent and sturdy, abundant, good, confident, worry-free, love, happiness, just all these wonderful words. And my sentence reads, feel blank in your story. And then every day I get to look at that collage and say, hey, I want all of these things to be part of my story. I want to feel sturdy. I want to feel happy. I want to feel love. I want to feel competent. I want to feel just happy and good. And that little collage is actually on my desk at work. And so I look at it every day and I love it. And I'm just so grateful to that girl, for that therapist, for helping me put down so tangibly what I want for myself. That little collage kind of does encapsulate everything that we talked about, everything that I had grown to understand and learn is really in that little collage. And I just love it. And it's darn cute too, so. But then she ended up graduating, and good for her. She deserves the world. And she changed practices at the end of her education. So I couldn't see her anymore. Different insurances and all that. So I didn't have a therapist for a while. But I did have podcasts. And I love podcasts. Which is silly. I'm making a podcast and I love podcasts. I really enjoyed, and I still enjoy, a podcast called Better Than Happy, hosted by someone named Jody Moore. Now, I don't really agree with everything she says there, but the essence of her life coaching strategies, they really speak to me, and they kind of give me these step-by-step ideas for how to implement those things in my life, in my actual situations. So it's actually really valuable, and it's kind of been in the role of therapist for me at a few different points throughout this story. And again, I don't agree with everything she says, but I really highly recommend it as like a free place to start if you need help. Her episode titles are pretty detailed in what she'll cover in the episode itself. So scroll through and read the titles of the episodes for things that you may need help with. And if you have any good podcast recommendations, no matter what they are, self-help, comedy, whatever, I'd love to hear them. So let me know. But back to therapy again. In summer of 2022, that was when I realized I was struggling with my anxiety to the point of anxiety attacks 2 or 3 times a week. And I mean, think about it this way. If I went to the gym 2 or 3 times a week, I would be so fit. If I practiced the piano 2 or 3 times a week, I'd be so good at the piano. But I was having anxiety attacks 2 or 3 times a week. So you can imagine the kind of toll that it took on me and how it really affected me. And they would kind of come out of the blue sometimes during things like job interviews. And that happened actually on more than one occasion, that I had an anxiety attack during job interviews. It was awful, you guys. I had a part-time work from home job at the time, and I couldn't do my work effectively. I didn't know any of my neighbors around me, so I was kind of isolated and kind of depressed. James was driving to work an hour each way at the time, and so I felt pretty alone, and I felt pretty anxious on a very regular basis. And so I saw the doctor. I said, I can't live like this anymore. And he ended up prescribing 10 milligrams of Lexapro daily, just like I think I mentioned that in episode 1 too. He also prescribed another medication to take on sort of an as-needed basis for when I felt an anxiety attack about to happen, or if I was in the midst of one, I could take it and it would kind of help me calm down. And these two medications have helped me so much. And I don't know if I want to stay on medication the rest of my life. I hope I get to a place where I'm not like as dependent on it and I can choose to come off of it. But I mean, how am I going to know if I'm at that point unless I do come off of it? And that thought scares me because I feel like I've only just barely become reliably stable. So to come off of medication right now I think would be a mistake. But eventually in my life, I would really love to not be taking meds every day. But then, to continue the story, James and I ended up moving again about 18 months ago. This will be the summer of 2023. And I found a new therapist again, only about 4 months ago. And I've healed a lot from where I began this journey. And I'm able to tell my story to my therapist or to people that I end up trusting enough to share. I can tell my story in a way that doesn't cause me panic or fear or much anxiety. And I'm able to look more rationally at my emotional responses and lean into my feelings and listen to what they're trying to tell me. And the funny thing is, even though I'm not feeling anxiety to the level I used to, my anxiety still shines through, as it often always will do. It comes through in my life in different ways, and most specifically in my relationship with James. He and I are super in love and everything like that. Everything's fine. In fact, everything's wonderful. And we're pretty good at our communication and problem solving because we kind of understand where each other's coming from with our childhood trauma and adolescent trauma. But we decided to see my therapist now together for couples counseling. Since we both have such significant baggage that we bring to the table, we want to make sure we're going to be good parents in the future. We want to make sure that we're going to be able to reach our potential. And essentially, we want to nip the problems in the bud before they really have a chance to rear their ugly heads. So we're doing couples counseling, and that has already made a significant positive impact in our relationship. We've discovered faults, which is kind of funny, but also we've discovered ways to fix these faults, or at least mitigate them, or navigate them. And we have grown in patience with one another in such impactful ways for everything. So we are so much stronger because of our counseling, and honestly, it's the best. Highly recommend it. It's just proactive problem solving. Nothing to be ashamed of. Like, even if you have major problems and go to counseling, that's nothing to be ashamed of. If you had a broken arm and went to the doctor, people are going to say, "Oh my gosh, you were such a weakling. Why'd you go to the doctor?" No, that's just what you do. You're broken, you need help, you go to the doctor. You're struggling, you need help, you go get counseling. That's just what you do. If you can. And I realize I'm from a position of privilege because not everybody can. But again, then there's always a choice. There's always something you can do. Podcasts are free. You have a phone, you have a podcast. It's just built right in. There's always something you can do. It's been kind of amazing to, as I talk about this, to take note of where I've come from and to see how far I've come. As you know, as a child of a transgender person, these circumstances do not make anything in our lives easy. And although for me, I for one have made some mistakes and some bad mistakes in the last 10 years as a result of my mental health and dealing with all these things. But I am so proud of myself for what I've been able to accomplish. I just feel so grateful for the professionals and my loved ones, my friends and family that have helped me be raised higher than I think I ever could. I'm more empathetic. I'm more conscious of other people's challenges in their lives. I think I am also more loving. Some people might look at this and say that I'm transphobic or hate people, but no, I really hold such love for people because I know what it's like to go through hard things. And to be I'm sure, I mean, to be trans can't be easy. So like I don't know. I even if I don't know the specific type of difficult that something is, I have respect and love for people going through difficult things like this. And I'm just, to keep going here, really grateful for my husband. And since being with him, my growth has exponentially accelerated, and that's in large part to his efforts. James is amazing. Seriously, so amazing. Can't speak can't speak highly of him enough. That's not how you say that. But anyway, long story short, therapy is great as long as you have the right therapist and you are willing to do the work to heal. Because you have to have someone you can like and trust and relate to and listen to. Someone that you'll actually do what they recommend. But anyway, with that, I will bring this episode to an end, but not before I ask you for things that you'd like to share about this topic. Have you been to therapy or done other things to help deal with the trauma of a transgender parent? Because it is severe trauma. Something that helps me know how severe it is, that helps me kind of, this litmus test of severity, if you will, is that every time I see someone that I sound like Glinda there. You seem wicked, popular. Every time I see someone. Anyway, whenever I see someone tall and who looks like my trans dad, I always think that it is. Every time I do a double take, I have a little jolt of emotion, and I think, is that my trans dad? Is that him or her or whatever? Compare that to every time I see a tall, blonde, 20-something guy, I think it's the guy who perpetrated the sexual assaults I went through. So if that doesn't tell you how severe it is, like, my brain has the same fight or flight or freeze reaction to both scenarios. Like, that's the level of trauma we're dealing with here. So it's severe trauma, guys. It's not easy. It's not easy. And we are just going through one day at a time, aren't we? I would love to hear your experiences about healing and therapy and anything else you've done to get through this and to come out better for it. So if you'd like to share, please send me an email with a very explicit instruction if I can share it on the show. If it's not explicit that I can share it, I probably won't, because I know this stuff is very, very private. The email address for the show is mytransdad@gmail.com, and you can follow @mytransdad on Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Facebook, all that good stuff. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you later. See you next time.